The moment her SUV crossed the rusted gate, I knew this wouldn't end quietly, because private roads don't invite entitled strangers, and this woman drove in like she owned the land, the trees, and everyone on it. Cameras were already rolling when HOA Karen stormed onto our hunting road, furious, fearless, and completely unaware she was about to make the worst mistake of her life. This road wasn't public, wasn't shared, and definitely wasn't hers. It cut through miles of wooded land my family had owned for decades, a quiet stretch we used for hunting, hauling equipment, and escaping the noise of town. We'd posted signs, locked gates, and warned neighbors repeatedly. Most people respected it. Karen didn't. She blasted past the private property sign, tires kicking up dust, cell phone pressed to her ear, already shouting to someone about illegal access. At first, I thought she'd turn around. People usually do once they realize they're being recorded. Instead, she parked sideways across the road like a blockade, stepped out in oversized sunglasses, and started screaming about HOA authority, emergency access, and how she'd have us arrested by nightfall. The absurd confidence was almost impressive. She spoke like rules bent around her, like land deeds evaporated when she raised her voice. What Karen didn't know was that this wasn't the first time. She'd driven through before, ignored warnings, threatened fines she had no power to issue. We'd filed complaints. We'd called non-emergency lines. Nothing stuck. So this time, I decided to stop reacting and start documenting. Not to escalate, not to hurt anyone, but to end it permanently with proof no one could ignore. That's when I quietly placed the spike strip. Not hidden, not camouflaged, not a trap clearly visible if you bothered to look where you were driving. It was positioned beyond the gate, on our land, where no authorized vehicle should be traveling without permission. I stepped back, let the camera roll, and waited. Karen was still yelling when she jumped back into her SUV, revving the engine dramatically like she was making a point. She never looked down. The sound that followed wasn't loud, just final. A sharp hiss. A sudden stop. Silence. Then shock. Her face changed instantly when she realized this wasn't a bluff, and that the road she tried to control had finally pushed back. Karen froze inside the SUV, hands gripping the steering wheel as if she could will the tire back to life through sheer entitlement. The hissing stopped, replaced by an eerie quiet that settled over the trees. Then the door flew open. She stepped out slowly, staring at the flattened tire like it had personally betrayed her, mouth hanging open before rage rushed back in full force. "What did you do?" she screamed, spinning toward me and the camera, voice echoing down the road. Her face turned red, veins visible, finger jabbing the air like it was a weapon. She accused me of vandalism, assault, sabotage, and about 10 other crimes she clearly didn't understand. I said nothing at first. Silence, I'd learned, makes people like her unravel faster than any argument. She marched closer, heels sinking into the dirt, still not noticing the multiple signs around her. Private road. No trespassing. Video recording in progress. Her eyes finally flicked to the camera, and for a brief moment, doubt crept in. Then she scoffed, waved it off, and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she announced loudly, like it was a threat that would end everything instantly. Good, I thought. That was the plan. She dialed 911 and launched into a dramatic monologue about being ambushed on a public access road by a dangerous man setting traps. She paced while talking, exaggerating every detail, conveniently leaving out the gate she ignored and the signs she passed. I stayed in frame, calm, hands visible, making sure the footage captured everything, her statements, her position on the road, the spike strip clearly placed on private property. While we waited, she tried intimidation. She warned me about lawsuits, media exposure, and her HOA connections. She claimed she'd have my land seized, my hunting permits revoked, my operation shut down. The words poured out faster as reality refused to bend. I asked her once, clearly, on camera, to leave the property once the police arrived. She laughed in my face. The sirens came sooner than she expected. A sheriff's SUV rolled up slowly, crunching gravel, lights flashing but not screaming. 2 deputies stepped out, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. Karen ran toward them immediately, arms flailing, interrupting before they could even speak. She demanded my arrest, pointed at the tire, and claimed I'd endangered her life. One deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, we'll hear everyone. First question, whose road is this?" That single sentence cracked the foundation of her confidence. She hesitated, stammered, then said, "It's public. Everyone uses it." The deputy nodded, then looked at me. I handed over the deed, the survey map, and gestured to the camera footage already time-stamped and rolling. As they reviewed the signs, the gate, and the video, Karen's volume dropped. Her posture changed. For the first time since she arrived, she looked unsure. The deputies walked the length of the road slowly, reading every sign Karen had blown past without a second glance. One pointed out the property markers nailed to trees, another inspected the locked gate she'd driven around, all while Karen hovered behind them, arms crossed, muttering under her breath. The confidence she'd arrived with was draining fast, replaced by visible irritation and creeping panic. I stayed where I was, camera steady, answering questions calmly. I explained how long my family had owned the land, how the road was used strictly for hunting and maintenance, and how this wasn't the first time she'd trespassed. I mentioned the previous warnings, the complaints, the documented encounters. The deputies listened carefully, occasionally nodding, occasionally glancing back at Karen as if pieces were finally lining up. Karen interrupted constantly. She insisted HOA rules overrode old land claims. She claimed the road was an emergency access route, though she couldn't produce a single document to support it. Every time she raised her voice, one of the deputies reminded her to lower it. That only made her angrier. She wasn't used to authority that didn't automatically side with her. Then came the spike strip question. One deputy asked directly why it was placed there. I explained it wasn't hidden, wasn't meant to harm anyone, and was positioned on private land to deter unauthorized vehicles after repeated trespassing incidents. I pointed out how clearly visible it was from the driver's seat if someone was paying attention. The deputy nodded again and wrote something down. Karen exploded. She accused me of premeditation, claimed I'd lured her in, and dramatically asked what would have happened if a child had been in the car. The deputy calmly replied that no one should be driving children down clearly marked private hunting roads without permission. That sentence hit her like a slap. The sheriff asked Karen for her license and registration. She complied, hands shaking slightly, still muttering about lawsuits and news stations. While he ran her information, the other deputy reviewed the footage on my camera. Watching her own words played back in real time seemed to rattle her more than anything else. You could see the realization forming, this wasn't her narrative anymore. When the deputy finished watching, he looked at her and asked, "Ma'am, why did you ignore the posted signs?" She tried to laugh it off, said she didn't think they were enforceable. The deputy didn't smile. He explained trespassing laws in plain terms, emphasizing that private property doesn't become public just because someone decides it should be. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly, but she still wasn't ready to admit defeat. The sheriff returned, handed her documents back, and asked her to step aside. His tone was firm, final, and not in her favor. The sheriff cleared his throat and spoke slowly, the way officers do when they want every word understood and recorded. He explained that the road was verified private property, clearly marked, and legally restricted. He stated that ignoring posted signs constituted trespassing, regardless of HOA position or personal belief. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, like her arguments were finally running out of oxygen. She protested anyway. She always did. She claimed the HOA needed access for inspections, emergencies, future development. The sheriff asked for documentation authorizing that access. She had none. She gestured vaguely toward town, saying it was common knowledge. The deputy shook his head. Common knowledge doesn't override deeds, surveys, and state law. Then came the part she never expected. The sheriff told her she was being formally warned for criminal trespass and that any further attempt to access the road would result in citation or arrest. He emphasized this warning was documented, time-stamped, and attached to her name. The camera caught everything, including the moment her face went pale. She tried to pivot. Suddenly she was the victim. She complained about her tire, demanded compensation, accused me of malicious intent. The deputy calmly pointed out that damage occurred while she was unlawfully driving on private land. He added that visible deterrents on private property are legal, provided they aren't concealed. The spike strip met that requirement. Karen stared at it again, as if hoping it would magically disappear. A tow truck was called. She argued against that too, insisting she'd drive it out herself. The sheriff refused. Driving a damaged vehicle further onto private land wasn't happening. As we waited, Karen paced, alternating between phone calls and glares. Every few minutes she looked at the camera, clearly aware now that the footage would outlive her excuses. The tow arrived, loud and unbothered. The operator hooked the SUV efficiently, barely acknowledging Karen's complaints. Watching her luxury vehicle lifted off the hunting road felt surreal, like a boundary finally being enforced in physical form. The road looked peaceful again the moment the SUV left it. Before departing, the sheriff turned to me and suggested installing additional signage and barriers. He nodded at the camera and said documentation was my best protection. Then he looked at Karen one last time and reminded her the warning stood permanently. As the vehicles disappeared down the road, the forest returned to silence. No yelling. No engines. Just wind through trees and the quiet satisfaction of knowing this time, there was proof. I thought that would be the end of it, but people like Karen don't disappear quietly once reality contradicts their ego. For a few days, the road stayed calm. No engines. No dust clouds. Just the familiar sounds of birds and wind through the trees. I almost believed the warning had worked, that the lesson had landed where it needed to. Then the emails started. The HOA sent a formal complaint claiming I'd endangered residents, blocked emergency access, and created a hostile environment. They demanded immediate removal of barriers and threatened legal action. What they didn't realize was that every claim they made was already disproven by footage, documentation, and the sheriff's written warning. Still, the audacity was impressive. Losing once hadn't stopped them from trying again. I responded with facts only. Deeds. Maps. Police reports. Video stills showing signage, gates, and Karen's own words. No insults. No emotion. Just evidence. A week later, the tone changed completely. The threats softened into requests for discussion. Then silence. But Karen wasn't finished. One afternoon, motion alerts pinged my phone. The cameras showed her again, this time on foot, standing outside the gate, phone raised, narrating angrily to someone off-screen. She accused me of booby-trapping public land and claimed she was gathering evidence. She never crossed the gate. Not after the warning. She paced, fumed, and eventually left. The spike strip stayed where it was, untouched, doing its job without another sound. Neighbors started reaching out quietly. Some thanked me. Others shared stories about fines, threats, and intimidation they dealt with from the same HOA leadership. Apparently, Karen's behavior wasn't new. She'd just finally aimed it at the wrong property, one that pushed back with documentation instead of fear. Weeks passed. No more incidents. The road returned to what it always should have been, private, quiet, respected. Hunting season came and went without interruption. The footage sat safely backed up, never uploaded, never shared publicly. It didn't need to be. Its power was in existing. What stuck with me most wasn't the confrontation or the police. It was how quickly authority collapses when it isn't real. Karen had relied on volume, confidence, and intimidation for years. All it took to stop it was a boundary, clearly marked, calmly enforced, and backed by proof. Some lessons are loud. Others arrive with a soft hiss and a sudden stop. What surprised me most was how fast the story traveled once Karen lost her grip on the situation. I never posted the footage, never named her publicly, yet word spread through town like smoke. People talk when someone who's bullied for years finally hits a wall. Suddenly, strangers nodded differently at the hardware store. Conversations stopped when I walked by, then restarted with quieter tones. A month later, a certified letter arrived. The HOA was reviewing access boundaries and proposed a meeting to resolve misunderstandings. I attended with a folder, not expectations. Karen sat across the table, noticeably quieter, eyes avoiding mine. She didn't interrupt once. That alone told me everything had changed. Maps were unfolded. Lawyers spoke. The road was officially removed from any HOA documentation as an access route. A formal notice was issued to all residents stating the hunting road was private property and off-limits. Karen never objected. Not a word. The same woman who'd screamed about authority now stared at her hands while reality rewrote itself in ink. Afterward, one board member pulled me aside and apologized. He admitted complaints against Karen had been ignored for years because no one wanted conflict. It was easier to let her run over people than stop her. Until she drove over the wrong road. Accountability, it turned out, was contagious. I upgraded the gate soon after. Heavy steel. Reflective signage. Cameras with wider coverage. Not because I was afraid, but because clarity prevents conflict. Boundaries work best when they're impossible to misunderstand. Since then, not a single tire has crossed that line without permission. Every now and then, someone asks if I regret the spike strip. I don't. It wasn't revenge. It was a consequence. A visible one. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was trapped. The only thing damaged was an illusion of power that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Karen still lives nearby. I see her sometimes, driving past the turnoff without slowing. She never looks down the road anymore. Some people learn loudly. Others learn once and carry it quietly forever. There's something sobering about watching confidence drain from someone who believed rules applied only to others. It's not satisfying in a dramatic way. It's quiet, instructional, and permanent. The kind of moment that reshapes how an entire community behaves when boundaries are finally defended without apology or fear. Time revealed that enforcing limits didn't isolate me, it unified neighbors who'd stayed silent too long, proving resolve can restore balance where intimidation once thrived unchecked, and accountability endures here. The land is peaceful again. The road is just a road. And the camera still watches, patient, in case anyone forgets where public ends and private begins. Peace has a strange way of revealing what chaos used to hide. With the road quiet again, I started noticing how tense things had been before, how often I'd expected an engine sound that didn't belong. The absence of conflict felt unfamiliar at first, like silence after years of noise. It took time to realize nothing was missing. Something toxic was gone. Then hunting season returned, and with it came friends, family, and long mornings on that same road Karen once claimed. Trucks rolled through with permission, radios low, laughter easy. Every visitor commented on the new gate, the signs, the cameras. Not with fear, but with relief. Clear rules meant no drama. No guessing. No arguments waiting around a bend. One evening, an older neighbor stopped by. He'd lived nearby longer than I had and told me stories about past disputes with the HOA. Fines invented on the spot. Threats delivered with smiles. He said watching someone finally say no without backing down changed how people saw their own rights. You didn't just block a road, he said. You blocked a pattern. Karen's name came up less and less. When it did, it was quieter, stripped of authority. She was no longer the person who decided things, just someone who once overstepped and learned she couldn't do it again. Power, I realized, isn't loud by default. It only gets noisy when it's questioned. The footage remained archived, untouched. Occasionally I reviewed it, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how quickly situations escalate when boundaries are ignored. The camera had done more than record a confrontation. It preserved truth, unedited, immune to revision. In a world where stories get twisted fast, that mattered. I added one more sign near the entrance, simple and calm: private property. No trespassing. Enforced. No threats. No attitude. Just fact. Since then, not a single person has challenged it. Most people don't want conflict. They just need clarity. What stayed with me was how easily things could have gone differently. A shouting match. An arrest. An accident. Instead, restraint and preparation kept everything grounded. The spike strip wasn't the story. Documentation was. Patience was. Knowing the law and standing on it without apology made all the difference. Sometimes people ask why I didn't just give in, open the road, avoid trouble. The answer is simple. Yielding once teaches entitlement where to strike next. Standing firm teaches it where not to. The forest doesn't care about HOA titles or ego. It responds only to respect. And now, so does the road. Months passed, and the incident faded into something almost unreal, like a story that happened to someone else. Life settled into routines again. Early mornings. Late evenings. Quiet drives down a road that now felt undeniably protected. But every so often, something small would remind me how close that day came to spiraling another way. It happened one afternoon when a new family moved into the area. I spotted their car slow near the turnoff, hesitation clear even from a distance. They read the signs carefully, stopped, then turned around without crossing the gate. That moment mattered more than the confrontation ever did. It showed the boundary was doing its job without confrontation, without drama. Later that week, the father introduced himself in town. He thanked me for making things clear. Said he'd heard stories about the road and wanted to be sure his kids stayed out of trouble. Stories travel differently once the truth anchors them. They stop inflating and start instructing. Karen never challenged the road again. But once, late in the season, I saw her parked on the main county road, staring down the hunting path from a distance. No phone. No yelling. Just watching. For a brief second, I wondered what she was thinking. Regret. Anger. Calculation. Then she drove off, slowly, carefully, tires never crossing that invisible line. That image stayed with me. Not because it felt victorious, but because it showed change. Real change doesn't announce itself. It just alters behavior. The HOA never contacted me again. No emails. No letters. No emergency access claims. The road was gone from their conversations entirely. And with it went a certain fear neighbors had carried quietly. People started pushing back in small ways. Asking questions. Requesting proof. Authority began to require justification instead of volume. I realized then that the spike strip wasn't the turning point. The turning point was preparation. Knowing the law. Knowing the land. Being ready before the conflict arrived. Most people wait until they're angry to act. That's when mistakes happen. I acted before, when thinking was still clear. If there's a lesson buried in all this, it's not about Karen or HOAs or even private roads. It's about boundaries only working when they're enforced calmly and consistently. Yelling invites yelling. Proof invites silence. The road still looks the same as it always did. Dirt. Trees. Shadows stretching long at sunset. But it feels different now. Not because it changed, but because the question of who controls it has been answered permanently. Somewhere out there, someone else is deciding whether to ignore a sign, cross a line, test a limit. They won't choose this road. And that quiet certainty is worth everything. The final chapter of this story isn't flashy, it's quiet, almost ordinary. The road remains the same stretch of dirt and gravel it always was, but the energy surrounding it has shifted. What was once tension, dust, and shouting has been replaced by calm, predictable order. Every vehicle that enters does so with permission, every visitor respectful of boundaries. That alone feels monumental. Karen is gone from the picture. I don't see her lurking near the gate anymore, no urgent calls to the HOA, no dramatic confrontations. I've heard from neighbors that she complains quietly now, but the fire she once wielded so aggressively has lost its audience. Authority isn't about volume, it's about legitimacy, and she discovered that the hard way. The spike strip, the footage, the warning, they weren't punishments, they were reminders of that simple fact. Life has returned to normal, and with it, a sense of confidence that wasn't there before. I can walk the road without tension, set up hunting equipment, or take a long drive into the woods without worrying about entitled intrusions. The presence of cameras, clear signage, and legal documentation means that if someone does test the limits, I have the proof to protect myself, my land, and my neighbors. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realize this was never really about a spike strip or a single confrontation. It was about standing firm. About turning chaos into structure, threats into evidence, and intimidation into boundaries. Karen didn't get away with her behavior because preparation met entitlement in a calm, methodical way. It wasn't anger that solved the problem, it was strategy, patience, and a refusal to be bullied. Now, when neighbors drive down the road, there's a subtle understanding in the way they navigate it. They recognize property lines, respect signage, and remember the story without needing it retold. The lesson is embedded in the land itself. Authority no longer belongs to those who scream the loudest, it belongs to those who act with clarity and certainty. The camera still sits on the edge of the trees, quietly recording, though nothing dramatic ever appears. It's a reminder, a guardian, a silent witness. And if someone forgets what private really means, it will be ready. That's the power of preparedness, the quiet enforcement of rules that people can't argue with. In the end, HOA Karen drove onto our private hunting road, but she didn't leave in control. The spike strip, the footage, the sheriff's warning, all were instruments of consequence, not revenge. The road is ours, respected, and safe. Sometimes, the loudest lesson isn't delivered with words, it's delivered with boundaries, patience, and proof that actions have consequences. The story ends here, but the message remains clear: know your limits, enforce them calmly, and entitlement doesn't stand a chance.